Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. The most important updates are coming from three directions: from Kherson area, from Avdiivka area, and from Bakhmut area, and we will discuss them one by one. First we're going to start with Kherson direction. During the previous night, the Russians launched a very powerful artillery preparation and bombing and bombardments of Krinky, trying to destroy as many as possible Ukrainian positions and trying them to pin them down and not to allow them to use their limited resources. As you know, the Ukrainians don't have significant number of forces, probably up to 1 battalion, even less than 1 battalion obviously, and of course they're not flexible, they're not mobile, and the Russians tried to use this thing until the Ukrainians managed to collect some critical mass. And the previous night, the Russians were bombing the city heavily. And the main purpose of those bombardments were to pin down the Ukrainians and not to allow them to send reserves to the south, to the forest that located on the south of Krinky, where the Russians during the previous night tried to counterattack and to return their lost positions. So, two important things from this area. First of all is that the Russians, at some point of clashes for Krinky, lost control over the northern part of this forest, and the Ukrainians managed to to develop their positions and to send a reconnaissance squad or sabotage group further to the south, and they were trying to dig in deeper in the forest. The Russians realized that this situation is going to become critical if they lose control of the forest, and they managed to collect forces and to counterattack. And currently we don't know for sure whether the Russians were able to force the Ukrainians to step back, but as I understand, the next few days the main clashes and the main activity is going to take place exactly in this part of the forest. And if the Ukrainians are able to dig in deeper, first of all, they are going to receive some positions where they can hide, and some hidden positions, something like this. Also, very interesting updates are coming from Beryslav. The Russians continue bombardment of the city, and today we got at least few answers to the questions why the Russians were bombing this city so heavy. And the main reason of such heavy bombardments is that Beryslav is a very big building with significant number of parking places, with ammo depots and malls and so on, where the Ukrainians could still can hide a lot of significant number of vehicles. For example, on this video we see how the Russian reconnaissance team managed to discover another parking place in Beryslav. We see significant number of light vehicles. It's not like armored vehicles, Bradley or tanks. This is just support machines that Ukrainians could use for support purposes, for evacuation purposes, and that building was destroyed as a result of FAB strike. So pretty good result for the Russians during the previous night. Another interesting video we got from the village by the name of Gladovka, and that video was published by the Ukrainian sources. On this video we can see a very big and very huge Russian convoy, up to 11 not armored vehicles, but up to 11 trucks, military trucks that can redeploy forces, were discovered and spotted by the Ukrainians on the line on the road between Malykopony and the Gladovka, and there was, as you can see, a drone. The drone sends necessary information for the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians start bombing this territory heavily. There are a few things that we need to note and we need to understand. First of all is, according to this video, we see that Ukrainians don't have problems with drones in this area, and that means that the Russians have significant problems in air defense and in electronic warfare equipment. So we know that electronic warfare, usually the Russians use against FPV drones. For drones like this one, who was flying above the Russian convoy, the Russians need to use air defense systems like Strela 1, but we see some hole in Russian air defense, and the Ukrainians used that situation to damage and destroy the Russian convoy. The second thing we can see from this video is that the Russians were moving this significant number of forces in direction of the Dnipro River, trying to help probably the Russian forces to, to destroy and the foothold of the Ukrainian forces in Krinky and something like this. Anyway, as a result of that bombardment, according to the Ukrainian sources, the Russians lost up to 25 soldiers killed and something around 20 soldiers wounded. So that was a very powerful attack and very big losses. Furthermore, I would say that day before, the Ukrainian sources report about explosions and strikes against Skadovsk. So that was like this is the area of Russian operational reserves. And as I understand, the Ukrainians know exactly which forces the Russians are planning to use to maintain their situation along the Dnieper River. And first they made the strikes against Skadovsk and destroyed some number of Russian forces. Then the Russians managed to concentrate and collect some infantry, and they sent this infantry in direction of Radinsk. Were trying to send their forces in direction of Radinsk, and from Radinsk the Russians were planning to stretch the forces along the entire bank of the river, but as you can see, the convoy was destroyed and the reinforcement haven't arrived to the place they were expected. So the situation continued develops in not a very good way for the Russians, and they need to find a solution and to find a way how to establish like 100% air defense forces system and electronic warfare equipment to suppress and to prevent in the future from such a situation. Now we are moving further to Avdiivka direction, and when talking about Avdiivka direction, we received the geolocated video confirmation of Russian progress in Stepove. On this video we can see the Russian soldiers who were running on the edge positions on the eastern edge of the village Stepove. The Russian soldiers were trying to repel Ukrainian counterattacks. The Ukrainians were trying to use all types of weapons they have. On this video we see the Ukrainian Bradley who entered the village, this part trying to attack the Russians with machine guns. We see Ukrainian FPV drones flying above this territory and dealing lots of strikes against the Russian positions. Anyway, few important things that we need to note. First of all, this video was made at least a day ago, so these are not events that took place this night. It's like at least 24 or maybe even more, 36 hours passed since that video was made. And according to some Russian sources, since that video, the Russians managed to improve their positions in Stepove, in Petrovska in Russian, to develop their foothold and even move further to the west along this small village. So according to unconfirmed information, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to develop their positions in Stepove and to enter the western outskirts of the village. And the main forces that took place in this operation or are taking place is 114th Russian motorized brigade. Also we got so the Russians continue offensive operation, and probably today we're going to receive the first updates that entire Stepove was liberated by the Russian forces, and this is going to be the beginning of Avdiivka disaster. Also updates are coming from the northern direction of Krasnogorovka. On this video we can see how the Ukrainian forces were bombing and attacking the Russian infantry with FPV drones. We are using this video for two purposes. First of all is that to confirm the edge Russian geolocated positions on along this tree line, and the second purpose is that the Ukrainians don't have problems with electronic warfare. Just a few signals, just a few like drones at some points have problems with the signals, but for now it doesn't mean anything. But now the Russians, if they want to continue offensive, need to improve their electronic warfare in this direction, and then they will be able to proceed. I believe they need at least a day to get this equipment as close as possible to the combat line, and then they will move further. So this is the situation on the northern flank of Avdiivka. Also, updates are coming from the southern part. The Russians continue destroying the Ukrainian armored vehicles on the line between Orlovka, Severnaya, Tonenka. If you remember, during the previous day, the Russians managed to destroy one ammo depot with the Ulmur missile, self-navigated one, and also the Russians destroyed another tank, and the Russians continue destroying the Ukrainian armored vehicles. Maybe these armored vehicles were abandoned, maybe the Ukrainians tried to hide them. Anyway, the Russians continue preparation of this foothold for further offensives, because we see that on the northern flank the Russians everything is according to schedule, but the southern part has some problems. The Russians need to hurry up and to speed up the offensive operation. Also, we got a lot of updates from the southern part of Avdiivka itself. For example, we got a text message that the Russians managed to develop their offensive operation in the industrial zone on the south of Avdiivka. So basically, according to the text message, the Russians managed to improve their positions and continue their offensive operation deep inside Avdiivka. We don't know the exact progress. I'm not sure that the Russians managed to establish control over the entire area, but probably a few more blocks, few more 100 meters were captured by the Russians as the attack during the previous 24 hours. The only thing we got something like this was captured or improved by the Russians during the previous night. Also, we got geolocation from fortification, Tsarskaya Okhota fortification. On this area, we see the beginning of Russian artillery preparation that took place this night. The Russians were bombing this territory heavily. This is a very important stronghold and a very important chain of Ukrainian defense because there are lots of underground facilities, and basically the Ukrainians have possibilities to send their forces from these underground facilities to the south in direction of the broken bridge in direction of the machine gun position. If you know, the machine gun position of Ukrainian forces is located in this area, and this is the only barrier that the Russians still haven't managed to bypass for further offensive operation deep inside of Avdiivka. And the Ukrainians have like underground safe roads, they can have normal rotation, so the situation is not very good. So the Russians try to solve the issue, and if they can do this, of course it will ease their further movement and they will be able to get inside of Avdiivka in a residential area. So as we can see, the Avdiivka news is tightening, and probably there are going to be more updates for the next day, during the day. And we got very interesting updates from Bakhmut. The Russians launched a full-scale offensive operation along the entire front line from Orekhovo-Vasilievka to Kurdyumovka. And the Russians managed to fix every single problem and issue in the village, in this city, in this agglomeration. And the most important, that the Russians don't have any problems with electronic warfare equipment. Today, the Russian sources published, the Russian electronic warfare operators published the video of electronic warfare operators jam and intercept. Significant number of drones, significant number of FPV drones were captured and let's say jammed and intercepted and captured by the Russian forces. So they managed to to improve this process in Avdiivka, not in Avdiivka, in Bakhmut, Artyomovsk. Currently there are no problems with this, at least above Bakhmut. Maybe if the Russians move further from Bakhmut, there are going to be some problems, obviously, because then the area of Ukrainian electronic warfare equipment starts. And of course, it's always problems when you enter the enemy's electronic warfare zone. When you stay in your own zone, you don't have problems. At least in Bakhmut, at least in Avdiivka, we know that the Russians have problems with electronic warfare zone in Kherson area, but probably they're trying to fix this. So let's return back to the ground. The Russians launched a significant artillery preparation of the area between Khromova, so everything in front of Ivanovska. And according to geolocations, according to all these bombardments, according to these strikes, attacks, you see the village is under very heavy fire. The Russians are planning to support their forces that currently attack the Ukrainians in the vicinity of between Khromovka and Bogdanovka. So according to geolocations we have, the Russians have launched a full-scale operation, offensive operation in direction of these territories. So they're trying to maintain their, let's say, edge positions in Bakhmut. So this is the area the Russians are trying to capture and to maintain, and this will of course force the Ukrainians to do something, to send some reserves, and this can lead to collapse of the front line. And if the Russians are able to develop this offensive operation and to get closer to Ivanovska, of course the Ukrainian forces in Klishchiivka and Avdiivka might appear in operational encirclement and even in a cauldron. Also, the Ukrainians published the video how they were bombing the Russian forces. This video was geolocated in the forest along the railways. This forest was captured by the Ukrainians during the battles of previous weeks, but as I understand, when the Russians launched counterattack, they also managed to recapture this territory. So according to all these geolocations, as you can see, the Ukrainians were bombing this territory heavily with cluster rounds. The Russians managed to return control over this territory, over these forests along the railways. So also another very important improvements before the full-scale operation in direction of Chasov Yar and canal between Chasov Yar and Bakhmut. And that's it for this short video. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.